Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, April 7, 2023. U.S. economy adding 236,000 jobs in March and the unemployment rate falling to 3.5% from 3.6%. Latest sign that the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes may be having an effect on the job market. We'll get reaction from the chair of the White House National Economic Council and talk with MarketWatch reporter Jeffry Bartash. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas says he did not disclose the lavish trips he took with a billionaire who is a Republican Party donor because he was advised that he did not need to disclose them. The trips were reported this week by ProPublica. Vice President Kamala Harris traveling to Tennessee to meet with two Democratic lawmakers expelled from the Tennessee House on Thursday by the Republican majority in that chamber for their role in a protest calling for more gun control after the school shooting in Nashville. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calling for more FBI involvement in stopping swatting, that tactic of falsely calling in police emergency response to harass someone. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talking about the escalating violence as Israel hits targets in Gaza and Lebanon in response to rocket attacks targeting Israel. From USA Today, job growth slowed in March as a winter hiring spree lost steam, while high interest rate hikes and inflation finally appeared to take a bigger toll on the labor market. U.S. employers added 236,000 jobs, a solid gain, but the weakest showing since December 2020. The unemployment rate, which is calculated from a separate survey, fell from 3.6% to 3.5%, close to a 50-year low, the Labor Department said Friday. The unemployment rate for blacks fell sharply to 5%, a record low. The White House National Economic Council Director Lael Brainerd asked about the jobs report today.
We've got an inflation report coming out next week. So how do you view this report in terms of how businesses, large banks are viewing where the economy is headed?
So I think generally this report is consistent with steady and stable growth. We're seeing some moderation. We're certainly seeing a reduction in inflation that has been quite welcome. And of course, we're very focused on bringing costs down for working Americans. You know, you've seen the president bringing insulin prices for seniors down to $35 a month, working on other prescription drugs. We've seen prices at the pump due to some of the policies that have been taken down about $1.40 since last summer. We're seeing reduced health care premiums. So we're very focused on bringing costs down for Americans as inflation comes down more broadly.
White House National Economic Council Director Lael Brainerd on MSNBC. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, former Congressional Budget Office Director, now president of the American Action Forum, saying in a video on AAF's Twitter that this jobs report is what the Federal Reserve wanted.
The March employment report is out and the verdict is in. The labor market is cooling. The index of aggregate payrolls, my indicator of aggregate demand for labor, grew at an annual rate of 1.3%. That's down from double digits a year ago. Clear evidence of lower demand for labor. Everything else in the report is cooler. We got unemployment down a little bit, but that's mostly because the labor force participation rate went up. This is a report that the Fed has been looking for.
More now on the Labor Department's March jobs report. We're joined on the phone by Jeffry Bartash, Washington reporter for MarketWatch. Welcome to Washington Today. President Biden putting out a tweet, "This is a good jobs report for hardworking Americans. Unemployment is near our record low of 3.5% and 236,000 jobs added in March." He says that's 12.6 million jobs created since I took office. We're facing economic challenges from a position of strength. But Republican Congressman Jason Smith, chair of the Ways and Means Committee, writes, rising interest rates, historic inflation, and labor shortages spurred by Democratic policies are increasing pressure on working Americans and forcing small businesses to do more with less than March jobs report shows. Which one is close to the truth?
Well, as many reporters would want to do, I'd split it down the middle. It was, as you mentioned, incredibly strong jobs report, lots of new jobs, super low unemployment rate, more people looking for work, and they do that because they think more jobs are available. The problem is that a strong labor market could feed into high inflation because companies have to pay higher wages and salaries to workers. And the Fed's trying to, as we all know, battle and bring that high inflation. It's raising interest rates to do so. And interest rates inevitably are going to slow hiring. They are going to cause unemployment to rise And I wouldn't necessarily trace this back to the Biden administration's policies or Republican policies. This is a fight about inflation. And the Fed's doing what it can to try to bring inflation down without causing the economy to go into recession. It's a fine edge to try to balance itself upon, and the Fed has very seldom succeeded in achieving this kind of Goldilocks scenario.
And 236,000, how does the Fed view that?
The Fed is, by raising interest rates, typically raising interest rates, it makes it more expensive for consumers to borrow, to buy a car, to buy a house. It makes it more expensive for businesses to take out a loan to expand their business. And inevitably, the economy is going to have to slow. And if that's the case, naturally, businesses will cut back in hiring. Consumers will save more and spend less. And if they're spending less, businesses produce less. Therefore, they need even fewer workers. And that's what the Fed's trying to achieve. But the Fed is forecast itself, the Fed itself is forecast inflation should rise to 4.5% by year end. Right now, it's at 3.5%. That's near a 55-year low. It's hard to see the unemployment rate falling or rising to the level the Fed would like to see, barring a sharp slowdown or even recession later this year.
Another data point that's often watched is wages. How did that fare in March?
Well, there's some good news here. Wage growth is slowing. The rate of increase in wages jumped to a 40-year high of almost 6% last year. It's now fallen down to a year-over-year level of 4.2%. Now, slowing wage growth isn't actually great for workers because we're all paying more for everything. We go to the grocery store, the gas station, what have you. Falling wages or slowing wage growth is only good if inflation falls at the same time. And that's what the Fed's trying to achieve. It's trying to bring wages down and bring inflation down so that the pressure is released on everybody. It's a hard task to achieve, and it's hard to see the Fed achieving that goal without more turbulence in the economy.
We're talking with Jeffry Bartash from MarketWatch. The markets on Wall Street closed for this Good Friday, but if they were open, how would they respond to the jobs report?
Wall Street had a kind of a split reaction based on what we can tell. Stocks likely would have risen today on the idea that the labor market is softening enough that the Fed might not have to raise interest rates too much higher. The fear, of course, being that higher interest rates could cause a recession. On the other hand, bond investors saw that the labor market is still really, really strong, and the truth is it is. And from that standpoint, the upward pressure on inflation might not relax as quickly as the Fed or bondholders would like. So, again, a split decision, and I think we need to see more information on inflation declining and the labor market softening before the Fed starts to say to itself, maybe we're getting to where we want to be.
This is not on the jobs report, but while I have you, every couple of days we're hearing the White House and congressional Republicans talk about the debt limit increase that's going to be needed later on this year to avoid a default, and the debate over whether to have spending cuts as part of that or as a separate discussion. And they keep staking out their positions, getting closer and closer to the deadline. How are the markets viewing this, and has there been any movement in reaction to what they think may happen?
By and large, no. Markets and investors in Wall Street have been through this fight before, and their expectation for now anyway is that it's going to come down to the wire, and eventually White House and the Congress will strike a deal. We've seen this battle play out over and over again. Frankly, it goes back to the 1950s. This all started way back then, actually, but these battles have intensified over the last decade or two. Ultimately, politicians usually strike a deal, but not without some angst. And if past is prologue, we're likely to see the two parties at loggerheads until the last moment. And at that point, markets sometimes react, and sometimes the stocks will slip and bond yields will go up. But it usually blows over pretty quickly if there's a deal. Now, is there a chance that finally, for once, the two parties might not strike a deal? Again, based on these disputes in the past, sooner or later they will come to an agreement.
Jeffry Bartash, Washington reporter for MarketWatch. Find his stories at marketwatch.com, and on Twitter it's at jbartash. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
A story at the Washington Post. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas said Friday he had been advised by colleagues and others in the judiciary that luxury trips financed by a close billionaire friend and conservative activist should be considered personal hospitality that did not have to be disclosed. His statement came more than 24 hours after a ProPublica report revealed that he had accepted luxury trips around the globe for more than 2 decades, including travel on a super yacht and private jet from Harlan Crow, a Dallas business executive and influential donor, to causes related to the law and judiciary. In the statement issued through the court's Public Information Office, Clarence Thomas said Harlan Crow and Kathy Crow were among the dearest friends of the justice and his wife, Virginia Thomas. The statement read, "As friends do, we have joined them on a number of family trips during the more than quarter century we have known them. Early in my tenure at the court, I sought guidance from my colleagues and others in the judiciary and was advised that this sort of personal hospitality from close personal friends who did not have business before the court was not reportable." Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, tweeted Thursday that Justice Thomas should be impeached. She elaborated today on the Lever Time podcast with journalist David Sirota.
So I want to start with some breaking news. Just before we're talking today, ProPublica breaks open the story of Clarence Thomas accepting luxury private jet and yacht trips from a billionaire Republican donor. It sounds like something out of a cartoon, a caricature of corruption. It's a story that seems to encapsulate all of the Supreme Court corruption that everyone kind of senses, but now it's like right out in the open. And you're calling for Clarence Thomas's impeachment. So the first question I have is, are you going to draft those articles of impeachment? And do you expect to have the support of many, if not most, of the House Democratic caucus?
I mean, listen, I think this is an emergency. I think that this is a crisis. I think we've had a crisis for some time on the Supreme Court. And so to get to the heart of your question, Congress is out of session for the next week. So that does give Democrats sometimes some time to strategize. And the way I feel about it is that I do think articles need to be introduced. If we decide strategically that the actual author of those articles and who introduces them may not be me, that's fine. I will support impeachment. But I just think that if no one's going to introduce it, I would certainly be open to doing so and drafting them myself. I think this has gone far, far beyond any sort of acceptable standard in any democracy, let alone an American democracy.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, on the Lever Time podcast. Justice Clarence Thomas's statement today read in part, "Early in my tenure at the court, I sought guidance from my colleagues and others in the judiciary and was advised that this sort of personal hospitality from close personal friends who did not have business before the court was not reportable." Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, tweeting, "Oh, please, if you're smoking cigars with Leonard Leo and other right-wing fixers, you should know they don't just have business before the court, their business is the court." Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN. Powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. WBIR-TV in Knoxville has a story. Black lawmakers in Tennessee want Republicans in the state to come to the table and talk with them after the expulsion of 2 black representatives on Thursday. The Tennessee Black Caucus of State Legislators spoke outside the Tennessee Capitol on Friday. Sam McKenzie, Democrat, chair, called the situation an injustice. 3 members of the House were up for expulsion after being accused of disrupting a session last week while pushing for gun law reform on the floor. The members included Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson, Democrats. The Tennessee 3 said the reason they demonstrated on the floor last week was that their voices on the issue of gun violence and reform were being silenced or ignored in the wake of the Covenant school shooting in Nashville. Gloria Johnson, who is white, was the only member not to be ousted after a handful of Republicans joined Democrats to vote against her expulsion, saving her by a single vote. After the vote, Gloria Johnson suggested the reason she was not expelled was that she is white. Here is State Representative Sam McKenzie at today's news conference.
The world saw what happened yesterday. We had three of our members, a Democratic Party, inappropriately indicted. And I'm glad for my homegirl, my Knox County partner, Gloria Johnson, the fact that she was not convicted, because this was a kangaroo court, convicted of her charges. But the optics, the world saw the optics. I don't have to say a word about the fact that our two young African-American brothers were unfairly prosecuted, information, evidence introduced inappropriately, but they handled themselves like true champions. They answered every question. Every person that interrogated them were lawyers on the other side. To me, it's a horrific indictment on the Tennessee GOP, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves. And the fact that they continue to keep their foot on the accelerator when they knew the world was watching really just shows what this Republican Party has sunk to. New lows. I'm from East Tennessee. We need more Howard Baker type Republicans that says the guy on the other side just might be right. We're right this time. They're wrong. These two men, I have every confidence that their counties and metropolitan areas are going to send them back. They're going to bring them back here. And my charge to this establishment is to seat them immediately. The people voted for them, and they need to take their rightful positions back.
Sam McKenzie, Tennessee State Representative, Democrat, and chair of the Tennessee Black Caucus at today's news conference in Nashville. Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton, a Republican, spoke to the media late Thursday night after those votes to expel the two Democratic House members and not expel a third.
I don't think it was rushed. I mean, what happened on the House floor is in the middle of session, and everybody here's a witness, and everybody saw it. You guys were technically witnesses as well. If you were here in the press, you were a witness. You don't need an investigation to look at what happened in front of you in real time. The expulsion was put out on Monday. They had their process on Thursday. One representative had the ability to get two attorneys here to represent her. And so they were able to have the ability to defend themselves, and that's what they did. You can't make decisions based off what may happen in the future for those individuals. What you do is you make a decision that is based on the actions of those three that they did on the House floor on that day, and that's what you look at. And so I can't sit here and make a decision based on what the public may or may not do or may elevate them to a higher status. That should not be a decision that I look at. That's not about the process and the procedures on the House floor. That's not about their actions on the House floor. That is outside of what would happen here. I'm concerned about the House floor following the process and procedures that are laid out that you should follow and not having a protest, as it was described over here, on the House floor.
Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton with reporters Thursday night in Nashville. USA Today reporting this afternoon, Vice President Kamala Harris plans to visit Nashville Friday to push for gun control and meet with two Tennessee Democratic lawmakers who were expelled from the General Assembly after protesting for gun reform on the floor of the State House. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, calling for more FBI involvement in combating swatting. That's the term for creating an emergency law enforcement response to target someone or some organization when there is no actual emergency. Senator Schumer holding a news conference at Lockport High School in Lockport, New York on Thursday. That school was swatted last week, leading to a lockdown, and several other schools across upstate and western New York have received similar recent threats.
Last Thursday, as we all know, New York saw an unprecedented wave of swatting attacks. False reports of a mass shooting taking place in 36 school districts across New York, including right here at Lockport High School, and most recently at South Park High School in South Buffalo. In total, police had to go to over 220 schools to check in. Many schools were put on lockdown. Thousands of students who didn't know what was going on. It's terrifying. I have a 4-year-old grandson. He'll start school next year, and I can imagine what happens. I can imagine what happens to the kids, to the parents, to the teachers and faculty and staff when something like this happens. It is terrifying. Now, the swatting attacks are very disturbing. I just ask anyone to imagine getting an alert or text that there was a mass shooter at school with students injured. And that's what the hoax claimed. He didn't even just say there's a mass shooter. He said students injured. That is just traumatizing. It's awful, awful, awful. The Western New York is still traumatized by horrible gun violence. We all remember what happened at the Top supermarket in East Buffalo just a little while ago. So false reports like this matter even more in a place like Buffalo, where we've had a real attack not very long ago. So we need action, real action. As majority leader, the first majority leader from New York ever, I have some clout, and I always try to use it for the people of Western New York and the people of New York State. And so I am here to say that the feds need to step up to hold the perpetrators accountable, to figure out what happened, and to figure out how to stop incidents like this, which are occurring in larger numbers at more and more schools.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the majority leader, at a news conference on Thursday at Lockport High School. He announced a 3-point plan that he says will combat these threats. 1, calling on the FBI for a full investigation and to hold those involved accountable. 2, pushing for $10 million for more federal resources to help tackle swatting. And 3, asking the FBI to track swatting as its own crime. Senator Schumer also issuing a joint statement today with the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, calling on Russia to release Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was detained last week and charged with espionage. Statement reads, "We strongly condemn the wrongful detention of U.S. citizen and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and demand the immediate release of this internationally known and respected independent journalist. Since his arrest, Russian authorities have failed to present any credible evidence to justify their fabricated charges," part of the joint statement. An article from CNN out of Jerusalem, tensions continued to simmer after Israel struck Palestinian militant targets in southern Lebanon and Gaza on Friday, raising the specter of a wider regional escalation in the wake of police raids on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The strikes came hours after dozens of rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israeli territory, an attack the Israeli military blamed on Palestinian militants. The barrage from Lebanon was the largest since 2006 between the two countries. Violence continued to spiral on Friday afternoon when 2 sisters, aged 16 and 20, with dual British-Israeli citizenship were killed and their mother was seriously wounded in a shooting attack in the occupied West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking to reporters about the situation.
Along with the defense minister and the head of the Central Command, I was briefed on the terrible terror attack. Evil and coward terrorists murdered 2 young sisters from a dear family living in Efrat. Their mother is fighting for her life. Together with the entire state of Israel, we're praying for her and sending our condolences to this family at this difficult moment. Our forces are carrying out a manhunt. It is only a matter of time and not a long time until we find them, just like we found all the terrorists in previous incidents. The Security Cabinet convened yesterday and some decisions were taken. We acted in Lebanon, we acted in Gaza, and reinforced our presence. We're carrying out extensive arrests and other actions which I cannot specify. I can say one thing. Our enemies are putting us to the test, and they will find out again in this test that we stand together, convinced in our righteous way, with all the backing to our forces who operate also in the holidays to protect our country and our citizens. Together, united, we will win.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That audio and the interpretation from I-24 News English. Many members of the U.S. Congress tweeting on this Good Friday holiday, including Dutch Ruppersberger, Democrat from Maryland, who writes, "Happy Good Friday to those who celebrate. May this time of reflection bring you peace and hope." Congressman Eric Burleson, Republican from Missouri, posting this video.
Today is Good Friday, a day that we recognize and honor the passing and the death of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who took it upon himself to take on the sins of all of us and the entire world in his sacrifice. But Easter is coming, and on Sunday we will celebrate the fact that Jesus rose from the dead and is living today. As we celebrate Easter, let us be reminded of the fact that we have a loving Savior who lives and lives for us.
Congressman Eric Burleson in a video tweet. Reports from Rome that Pope Francis not taking part in the Way of the Cross procession due to health concerns today. It is unseasonably cold in Rome, and the Pope has just been released from the hospital after a bout with bronchitis. He did preside over the Good Friday service inside St. Peter's Basilica. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.